Okay, so we're in the post-election kerfluffle, as I say. Or I stole that from NPR. That was one of they had that in one of their headlines of their story. I thought it was a good term, right? Kerfluffle, right? So Trump refuses to concede, right? And so why won't he refuse to concede? Why is he why is he refusing to concede? I used a double negative there. Sorry. Um, well, partly because there's a couple levels to this. You look at the psychological level, is Donald Trump doesn't like to lose, and he will claim victory even though he lost. He's had several bankruptcies, and he's always claimed that he's very successful. The objective reality for Trump sometimes is lost in what he likes to believe. For example, the whole Russia investigation. He denies that Russia had any say. And I've made the argument in the class that in previous classes that Russia didn't win the election for Donald Trump. He won the election, but they certainly did have an influence. And Trump denies all of that, and that probably because that would detract from his victory. Now, in this respect, psychologically, I don't think he has the ability to say I lost. And so my guess is what he's going to do is he's going to fight and fight and fight this until the point where he can't fight it anymore and he has to concede. And when he does concede, he'll say, "Well, the election was stolen from me," and probably until the day he dies, he'll say, "Well, the election was stolen." So that's kind of where I see it. Now, will he concede? Absolutely. I can't foresee an instance where he won't do it. Either the parties in power, the people surrounding him will say, "Hey, you have to do this," and eventually he will. Right now, does he have a case? Absolutely, he has a case. Right, that's his prerogative. Right. There's no evidence of mass voter fraud. Right. There is fraud. There's always fraud. Right. That's just reality. But all the evidence they cited is anecdotal, and sometimes it's misconstrued. This, oh, these dead people voted. Well, or I think that in the Georgia case, they allow for people to register for example, Mrs. Michael Hampson, right? And it was the wife of the person who had been deceased, right? And they didn't, the signatures matched, right? In other instances, for example, in Nevada, say, oh, these people aren't residents of Nevada. Well, you can be a resident of Nevada and not live in Nevada because you could be in the military. And so there's all these elements. And so there's not much actual evidence of fraud. Now there is fraud, absolutely, but not enough probably to turn the tide election or the to the level that Donald Trump's claiming, right? And so there is, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, right? There's no evidence of much fraud at all, right? It's just, you're always gonna have cases. In 2016, there's a case in Nevada of, Republican voting twice, right? You have always people who try to game the system, right? And it very rarely, is this, a big conspiracy like Trump's claiming. It's just never really that case in the United States. And so, does he have a case? Well, I mean, in some respect, yes. If there is instances of voter fraud, it should be investigated into to the extent of it, right? If votes were counted when they shouldn't be counted, then that should be investigated. So he has the ability to litigate this, enforce recounts and whatnot. That's his prerogative, and it should be his prerogative, right? Like as I said last week, there's this bizarreness to our election, and actually, I've never really thought about until this instance, right? Where the media calls it, and NPR, to my chagrin, to my anger, continually says, Joe Biden won. He's projected to win. And for the most part, we can say, he probably has won, but it hasn't been certified by the states yet. And that's really what it comes down to. And so Trump has the full ability to argue his point up until the states certify. And that point, it's pretty much done, right? And so then Joe Biden will probably be declared the winner. But the media, and again, I've really pushed back on NPR for this because that's what I primarily listen to, amongst other sources too, the BBC and whatnot. They say, well, he's won. Well, he technically hasn't yet. Joe Biden has, pretty much projected to win by the Associated Press, who is not a government entity. And so that's really a frustration that I have with that, because then Donald Trump's right in that respect. And he has the ability to litigate if there are votes that have been miscast or fraudulently cast or not counted out of policy or illegally. Then we should investigate that. That is within his prerogative. But there's no evidence of many votes, if that have been that have been miscast or have been illegally counted or whatnot, right? So there's no real evidence of this, right? And so I'm all for his ability to do so. But in my opinion, he's tilting at windmills to borrow from Cervantes, where he's fighting a fruitless battle, and mostly, in my opinion, to save face. But he very well might believe his own rhetoric, right? He's been using this rhetoric for many months now that there's voted by mail, so it can be fraudulent and whatnot, and it doesn't really have any empirical evidence to back it up. It's certainly possible. I'm not denying that, but the states and the counties certify. They audit their own elections. Like I said last week, he had the ability to go back and look at this stuff. The Republican Party, is part of this process too, right? There's a whole host of things he could have done beforehand, and he chose not to. And so the idea that there's this widespread fraud and everyone's in on it is utterly ridiculous. If, for example, let's assume there's fraud, why did the House not do well? Why is there a runoff in Georgia? Why are there all these things that go against Democratic policy if they want to control every level of government? They can't. And so the idea is a conspiracy that has very little, has no legs essentially. But then again, we do have instances of fraud that do exist, and we should investigate that to see how widespread it is. So what does this mean for Biden? Well, I mean, he's going to move along as with business as usual, but it's going to make his job transitioning more difficult. And as I said last week, I really think it's incumbent on Biden to actually investigate voter fraud and to actually have a commission, do what Trump said he would do in 2016 and disbanded that commission, and investigate fraud and prove to the American people that this process is fair, right? That and I don't know how we would accomplish that, but I think he should really make the best effort. Not because normatively he has to. That's not the case, right? It's because so many people distrust the process now that he has to go above and beyond and show the process is fair. And I think it would be problematic if he didn't do that. I don't think he will. But I think that would be the best step he can take, was to have a federal investigation, right, through the Justice Department, working along with the states to show, hey, this has been a fair process, and then work to strengthen that process for them more to make sure it's as most secure as possible, and work bipartisanly with this. And yet, it's not because there is fraud or because there's widespread fraud, but because so many people believe there is fraud. It's incumbent on him to then convince the American people that this is a fair system. This is a problem. People don't trust the elections. Fundamentally is a problem that we need to rectify, right? Because right or wrong, whether they're justified or not, people need to have faith in our elections do matter. Now, we'll talk about why that will matter in a few minutes, right? Now, Biden's transition, right? He's moving along, right? Typically speaking, when someone's voted out of office, either they're termed out or voted out, there's a transition, right? Some are more problematic than others. In 2000, the 9/11 Commission pointed out that part of the poor quality of the transition from the Clinton to the Bush administration could have contributed to the 9/11 attacks because the Bush administration wasn't up to speed. And this is not a Republican versus Democrat thing. It's just sometimes administrations don't do a good job at this. The Clinton administration was notoriously for example, they pulled all the W's off the keyboards. They actually did some things that were sophomoric and juvenile that actually impeded the Bush administration. And so they need to. So that was not a good transition, partly also because of how late it happened in the process because of the Florida recount. Now, for Biden's transition, he has a lot of things that he needs to get done. He needs to pick cabinet members, and who he picks are going to be important. He pledged to have the most diverse cabinet possible. And who he picks is going to be very telling. Is he going to pick someone like Elizabeth Warren to be head of the Treasury? She's been very, very critical of corporate America, not a socialist, but very, very left-leaning in terms of her corporate policies. Um, so that's going to be very telling. And so there's going to be a lot of speculation about, this will tell us where his administration is going to go. Now, what policies will he change in the first days of office? He published a list last week, and it's basically all Trump's executive orders. Trump, because he was ineffective in Congress, one, because he never rallied the Republicans to his causes, and when they were in power, and two, because once the Republicans lost power in the House, he really didn't have the ability to work across the aisle. Because of his policies. Trump did most of his policy making through executive order. The problem with that is that the next president can undo all of that. In Trump's defense, so did Barack Obama in the last days of his office. He did a lot of governing through executive order, which is problematic. I've been very critical of this, and so Trump's going to undo much of that, right? He's going to pull back on the DACA restrictions. He's going to do all those different things, right? He's going to, any executive order that Trump's made that, through climate policy, healthcare policy, immigration policy, he's going to basically undo and reinstate the Obama era executive orders. Now, every president can't do this. They typically don't do this to the extent that Trump did, and probably to the extent that Biden will do. But if Trump really wanted a legislative legacy, he should have, legislated or got the legislature, the Congress to go along with him. He didn't do so. And again, that's not a critique of his policies; it's a critique of his ability to get things done, which he wasn't able to do. Now, but Biden will attempt. Biden's made, the media has made attempts to quote unquote heal the country, bring people together, and he's going to have a hard time doing that. He barely won, and there's questions about election rigging and fraud and whatnot. Part of the problem is also the fundamental policies. He's a very aggressive climate policy. That's not going to be very popular amongst the conservative base or conservatives or many moderate people. It's not going to be popular in Texas because it's going to do away with oil and coal, or try to do away with that, right? And you have people on the extreme, on the left, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, arguing that we should keep a list of all Trump administration members and then bar them for working in government, or create a list, and that is idiotic at best. To create a list like that, if you look at this is an analogy. Don't take this as what I'm actually arguing, but if you look at anytime there's a human rights abuse, right? And I'm not arguing that the Trump administration made human rights abuse, but if you look at, after a country heals from basically a time of turmoil, they call this lustration, where you don't want to necessarily penalize the people in power during this time, because it just creates more division. And sometimes you just give people amnesty. Now, I'm not saying Trump administration is anything criminal. I'm not saying this is human rights abuse. I'm saying this is, but the idea around this is that when there's times of division and turmoil, you don't want to basically penalize people who are in power, because that just creates more division and turmoil. And keeping a list when not it's vindictive. It's these people were serving the United States in the government, whether you agree with their policies or not. That is fundamentally problematic, and I think that to even suggest that is dangerous and offensive, and we shouldn't speak like that, because then you create a blacklist, and to me it's ridiculous. Then it would dissuade people from wanting to serve in any future administration. It's idiotic, to say the least, and I could probably use stronger language if it wasn't on being recorded right now, to see how I feel about that. And I make this argument whether this is left or right blame policies. The idea that we penalize people for working in government because you didn't agree with their policies is idiotic. Okay. In terms of substantive policy, the Biden administration, his foreign policy, the president, as we've talked before in the course, has a very much a foreign policy focus, because that's really where the president can act. And so he's going to undo much of what Trump has done. He's going to re-engage, on the world scene, engage in climate change policy, the Paris Peace Agreement. He's going to try to reinstate the Iran nuclear deal. He's going to probably undo many of the tariffs against China, trying to bring back a relationship with China. Things like North Korea are going to be tricky because Trump did do fairly well with North Korea. That's going to be much trickier. In terms of Russia policy, Russia is not going to be very happy with his policy. Biden's policy, Russia is going to be, sanctioned. They're going to be countered very thoroughly. In terms of um, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, Biden's, he made the same claim about exiting, the same last two administrations have claimed about getting out of these wars. And I think, again, I was critical of the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration for, wanting to pull out when there's no definitive goal in mind. And I was extremely critical of the Trump administration for saying, "Hey, we're going to get out by this point," and also the Obama administration. That's problematic. It emboldens our enemies, and it says you just got to wait this out. And so, whether Biden can do that, it's going to be questionable. Israel policy will be interesting to see how Biden does with that. Trump's done a lot of good work with Israel in terms of getting some of the Muslim states to acknowledge Israel. That's a pretty big deal. And so to do so has been pretty important for Trump. That's a really big win for him. And I don't know if Biden can carry that out. Israel's not foolish, and they're going to. I mean, Netanyahu has already congratulated Biden, and the administrations are not the presidents. I mean, the U.S. government is not the president, and so they're going to work. They're probably going to continue those deals. It wasn't just the Trump administration who brokered those deals. Nevertheless, it's going to be, Trump was in a unique position. He had a very good relationship with Netanyahu, and I don't know if the Biden administration will be able to broker similar deals. The Obama administration had a more testy relationship with Israel, and they're much more critical of Israel. Trump was not, and so I don't know. That's a question we'll see how it plays out. But it's not going. I mean, Trump had a very cozy relationship with Israel and North Korea to some extent, and so I don't know if Biden will be able to replicate some of the success Trump had. Okay, in terms of policing, you'll see Biden return to the Obama era policies. Whether or not he sues departments for civil rights violations through the 14th Amendment is up in the air, because that is going to reduce morale in the police departments. It's going to create a very divisive tone for his administration with policing, and policing is already really depressed now. People are really, with George Floyd and the rioting and the protesting, people are quite upset with the policing in general, and so. I think mostly what we'll see is under the Obama administration, the Department of Justice provided education and funding for basically training officers to not racially profile, and we saw this with Ferguson and whatnot, and how to conduct policing. I think suing departments will be, again, he has to walk a fine line here, and I don't know if he will do that. Now, I mean, obviously there's times where that's needed, when there's just a large scale abuse is done by the police department. So I don't know if he'll be able to accomplish that, because it is, he's going to lose support from the police departments and the police unions and whatnot, which he needs their support. Now, Biden's legislative plan will be much more difficult. It depends on whether or not the Senate remains in Republican hands, which it probably will. He's going to have a hard time passing policies. He wants to pass this big climate policy. That's probably not going to happen at some level, or the way he wants it. If he really, again, back to bringing people together, he needs to find policies that everyone can get around, or have a policy that he's really going to give up stuff to the other side of the aisle. And so that's going to be very difficult for him if he has these policies that are very bold, because a policy that's bold, policy that does a lot of different things is not going to be, it's not going to have, it reduces the ability to compromise. So we'll see. Okay, moving on to non-Trump Biden stuff. The Defense Department, well, kind of. There's a shakeup at the Defense Department. Mark Esper was fired. This is probably rooted in Trump's frustration with the Russia probe. Esper didn't want to release some documentation, some declassified things Trump did. Also speculated that Trump fired him to make news. That's possible as well. I don't think it's very impactful. There's 2-3 months left in the administration. Unless Trump goes completely off the rails, I don't really foresee him doing much of any, this being much of a big deal. In theory, Trump could sign some deals, could do some things, but that's unlikely that anyone's going to want to do that. For example, he could sign a peace deal with the Taliban. I think the Taliban anyone's going to be suspect, because they know in 2 months that deal could be off. The other, Trump, there is a national security element to Trump not conceding. It makes us look weak. It makes us look like our government's in turmoil, and it's beneficial to people like Russia and whatnot. In theory, Trump could go completely off the rails, but I don't foresee that happening. He can go rogue or whatnot. That's unlikely. Anyways, moving on. COVID-19. So looks like more lockdowns potentially. I made the argument a few months ago that I didn't foresee lockdowns happening again, and because the genie was out of the bottle, there's fatigue, and it looks like Nevada might do it, and I think it was Washington's already doing it, and that's I'm surprised. I didn't think there was the political will to do so, but here we are. It goes back to making predictions. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And this is not being political science is not a predictive science or science much at all. But we'll see how this plays out. This is going to prove unpopular for the governors who do so, and it's like Steve Sisolak, right? He has another year in office before he's up for re-election, and this might come to bite him. Whether he's right or wrong, people are going to be frustrated, and there's fatigue. COVID numbers are rising. They're rising very aggressively, and why are they rising? Probably because of fatigue. Probably because of the winter months where people are inside all the time. COVID is an airborne disease, and if you're in close quarters with people, you're going to be breathing in their air and touching things with them, and so it's not an airborne. It's close contact disease, or sickness, and so the closer you are to people, if you're inside all the time, you're going to have a higher chance of getting it. And if you're outside, the particles dissipate faster. It's just much safer. And so the lockdowns will happen. How long they last and to what extent they go is questionable, right? We have the holidays coming up, and people are going to be legitimately frustrated, and there will be a cost to this. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't do these, but I've been saying it's going to be quite costly economically and politically. Now, also this week there was a vaccine announced, and that vaccine is a big deal, right? It's a big deal because potentially we can see the end of this, right? Now, who's going to get that is producing the vaccine. They have to get to people. The first people who are going to get it are frontline workers or people who are vulnerable, older people with health conditions, and whatnot. And so it'll be a few months before it gets down to everyone, right? And then the other issue is that people don't trust the vaccine. And so the government's going to have to do a really good job of convincing that you should take this, that this is safe, right? Okay, hurry up because I'm already out of time. The Georgia Senate elections are going to go to runoff. You'll see a massive amount of money put into there, and you'll see a massive turnout. Who will win? It's up in the air. But I think Republicans. I think this election was a referendum on Trump, And with the runoff elections, people are probably going to feel better with a divided government. If they didn't like Trump, but they're more conservatively minded, they're going to feel better with a divided government. And so my guess is that's, the Republicans are going to win out there. Now, there's a lot more to talk about that, but we'll talk about that next week. Moving on, the Supreme Court heard another challenge to the Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. It didn't seem like they were keen on overturning anything. The argument made, the lawsuit was that because Congress basically zeroed out the mandate, the penalization for the mandate, saying you had to have health insurance, that the law fell apart. Now, there's a principle in legal thought that in legal thought that if one part of the law is ruled out, doesn't mean the whole law collapses, and that we should preserve as much of the law as possible. And the justices basically said, well, seems to be what's happening. Just because this one piece of the law is gone doesn't mean the whole thing's going to crumble. And so that was how they seemed to go. Now, Justice Roberts was, he was very visibly frustrated by having to hear yet another Obamacare case. His point was, hey, you should fix this in the legislature. If you're upset, please stop asking us to do your job, which he's right in one respect. And so now, trying to speculate how the court will decide based upon the oral arguments, it's not very, you can glean something, but again, there's a high level of variability with this. But we'll see how it goes. But it didn't sound like they were that keen on overturning the Affordable Health Care Act. Lastly, Nevada has changed its constitution. Now, you're reading the Constitution right now, and this is why I put this here, is that we changed our Constitution to remove the language about marriages. Our Constitution currently says marriage is between a man and a woman. Because bans on gay marriage were ruled unconstitutional via the court system, that language was never removed from our Constitution. Now we've changed that. Now we allow, I don't remember what the language actually says substantially, but it essentially says that, anyone can get married here. And that's, we're the first state to do that. And so that's an important thing. So, we will update the Constitution and that language will be gone. So for those of you who say, hey, I don't expect you to have known this when you're doing your quiz, but for many people say, hey, we should move this language of our Constitution. That's one of the top things people say we should change. Well, it is going to be changed. So next semester, my students won't be able to say that. Anyway, sorry for blasting through these last few ones. I went too long. I'm probably talking way too fast. My apologies. But I will talk to you all next week. Thank you.